I have kind of been doing this from such a young age. And I've been very, very fortunate to actually grow up in Cornwall, so right on the coastline. And I've had such wonderful, magical childhood memories of being on the beach, out in the open environment. But unfortunately, plastic has polluted all of those memories. So because I've been exposed to plastic pollution my entire life, it's now why I want to give my life to tackling this. And it's that is the real catalyst for what I do.
So talk us through it. What is Beach Guardian?
So Beach Guardian is a marine conservation NGO that essentially aims to tackle plastic pollution by empowering communities. Everything we do is about people power, people coming together, taking a stance, taking responsibility, and really looking after our local environment. So we work in all different areas through education, outreach, working with businesses to stop plastic pollution at its source, working with policymakers, but also working within healthcare. We've recently started an initiative where we offer social prescribing, so getting people who are struggling with mental health, addiction, loneliness, down on beach cleans to connect with themselves, the environment, and other people too. So we do a whole host of stuff really to just tackle plastic pollution.
Now, since that first day on the beach, you've become more alert to it. But what have you noticed about the amount of plastics that are washing up on the seashore?
Well, there's two really important things I want to cover here, and that is if you speak to anybody that visits the area of coastline that we look after here in North Cornwall at Beach Guardian, they will tell you that over the last 5 years, the amount of plastic on the beaches here has decreased. The beaches are looking cleaner. Now, this is, of course, not because there's less plastic going into the ocean. That is not true. There's more and more plastic going into the ocean every single day. But what we're seeing is that people in their everyday lives within the community are taking responsibility. You know, you've got the retired lady that walks her dog every single morning and fills up a poo bag with plastic. You've got a family that goes down after school and they get a bag of plastic. So the beaches are getting cleaner. However, that's just talking about the bigger items. The microplastics, this problem is one that has been increasing noticeably. I actually remember a few years ago at the beach that I grew up on, Trevone Bay, I had never seen microplastics on this beach, but we did a beach clean. I remember the exact day, I remember who was there, and I looked in the strand line and suddenly microplastics. And now every day since, there's more and more. So, you know, it's really in a short time frame that we're seeing these differences.
Why do you think that's happening?
Well, I think obviously, you know, the positive side of things, why the beaches are getting cleaner, is because people feel this urgency and this desire and this connection to actually take action and do something. But the problem with microplastics, I think it's been able to go under the radar for such a long time because these particles are so small in size. You know, you've got people that go to the beach for their entire lifetime. I've had a lady join me on a beach clean and she says, you know, I've visited this beach every day for the last 80 years. There isn't a problem with plastic here. But I say, well, actually, look in the sand, look at these microplastics. And it's that real light bulb moment that actually beneath our feet this entire time, there has been this growing problem of microplastics. So now it's up to us doing things like we are today to talk about it, bring awareness to it so we can tackle it.
Now, earlier in the programme, we spoke to one of the scientists who've discovered microplastics embedded in human lungs. But some of the research that you've been looking at also zones in on health aspects, doesn't it?
Exactly, yes. So my research, I'm currently a PhD student with the University of Exeter and Plymouth Marine Laboratories, and I look at something a little bit different. So my research looks at microplastics, but also antimicrobial resistance. So this is the ability for microbes, so some of the most common and widespread infections caused by microorganisms, evolving the ability to be resistant to drugs, meaning antibiotics are no longer working. And everybody kind of knows about this problem, at least a little bit within the hospital environment. But actually recently, the physical environment has been shown to be a hotspot for antimicrobial resistance. You know, people using the environment for recreation, for example, are becoming exposed to these drug-resistant infectious organisms. We've seen that surfers, for example, going into bathing waters, become colonized by drug-resistant E. coli, for example. So my research looks at, well, in these environments where we have drug-resistant organisms, we also have microplastics. So when the microplastics are in the environment, they become colonized. So the microorganisms attach themselves to microplastics. And then we know that microplastics don't degrade in the environment. We know that they are transported all across oceans into new, pristine environments. So could microplastics be exposing people or animals to potentially disease-causing organisms that cannot be treated with antibiotics?
So that's really important research, but how can people play their part and stop microplastics getting into the ocean? I mean, is recycling and litter picking enough?
I think what's really important to recognise is that microplastic pollution is plastic pollution. And by reducing our consumption of plastics, we're reducing our output of microplastics. You know, one of the most common sources of microplastics just come from larger items that have broken up into these smaller fragments. So if we look at the kind of waste hierarchy, of course, we have recycling as an option, but also we have reducing. If we can reduce our consumption of plastics, ultimately we're reducing the amount of microplastics we're emitting. Another source of microplastics we see here in Cornwall are these tiny little pellets that we call mermaid's tears, also known as nurdles. These are the pre-production pellets that all plastics are made of. And so then if we can reduce our consumption of plastics, then we're reducing the amount of pellets that need to be produced. So I think reducing is always a great start, reducing plastics in all areas of our life. But of course, then litter picking is another great thing to do, because if we can take the larger items out of the environment, they're not going to fragment into microplastics, which are considerably harder to remove.
And what about those companies who claim they have alternative to plastic? So they're making packaging and stuff out of something that maybe can biodegrade more economically and environmentally friendly?
I think innovation is going to be our greatest ally in tackling some of these widespread issues like microplastics. Unfortunately, we do find some kind of negative stories to accompany this. I don't know if you've ever heard of greenwashing. So there are a lot of companies now that are kind of using this environmental agenda to sell their products, sometimes with the best intentions at heart, but sometimes just kind of using, the greatest kind of purchasing power within the consumer now lies within whether something is environmentally friendly. So if you can stick a green tag on something and say it's biodegradable or eco-friendly, people are probably more likely to buy it, even if it's got a heftier price tag. But what is the cost on the environment? Are we just kind of making knee-jerk reactions to try and do something when actually it may just have the same effects on the environment? So we do see this with, for example, biodegradable dog poo bags. I'm afraid it's not a very glamorous subject, but we do see that people are spending more money on biodegradable poo bags. They collect their dog poo, and then because it says biodegradable on the bag, people just leave it in the environment, thinking they're doing the right thing. Well, many of these biodegradable products need very, very specific conditions to actually start breaking down. Now, in the environment here in the UK, those conditions are entirely absent, meaning that it will just act the same as fossil fuel-based plastic, and it will become microplastics. So we need to be very, very careful when we innovate to communicate just how to deal with these new materials.
Now, you've been talking about plastic pollution since you were 12 years old. It's even steered you in terms of your career choices and your lifestyle. So if you could give one message to people out there watching, if there's one thing that they could do, what would it be?
I think sometimes conservation seems like something that, or being a volunteer seems like something you have to sacrifice to be able to do. And sometimes it may not be accessible to everybody, but actually being an environmentalist and caring about the environment is something that we can all do. And to tackle it, there is one thing that is accessible to everybody on this entire planet, and that is just to talk about the environment, talk about the planet, whether this is physically with words or online, make posters, whatever. Any conversation that you have about the environment is one step closer to protecting it. Because we talk about it, we connect to it. And once we're connected to something, we want to protect it. So my one message is just to talk about the environment.
So talk about the environment. Emily Stevenson, thank you very much.
Thank you.